Jeff Beck last night, which was killer.
Joining me now is musician Chuck Wright, whose new album "Sheltering Sky" is officially on the ballot for next year's Grammy Awards. We'll talk to him about that. His website is chuckwright.com. Welcome to the show, Chuck. And Chuck, literally as we were starting, you mentioned you saw Jeff Beck last night. Was it with him and Johnny Depp, or because I know that they just did something, and I thought
Yeah,
that's what they were
it
doing.
was, and honestly, I would have rather heard Jeff Beck's some of his older
Yeah,
tunes. And
I get
I
that.
mean, if
Yeah.
Johnny came out for a song or two, maybe that would be cool. But there were so many songs I wanted to hear, and as it was, he's 78, so you got to hand it to him for this is my eighth time seeing him, but you got to hand it to him for just being out there touring. He would do a song like Corpus Christi or We Ended as Lovers, but he'd only do the first third of the song and then end it. He wouldn't
Oh,
like finish the
interesting.
songs. Although in the beginning of the show, he would do the full Freeway Jam and would play full songs. But as it got later in the night, he would just do small pieces. I don't know if that's from fatigue or if he designed it that way, but you know, it's kind of cool seeing Johnny Depp because he's such a big star. But I don't think it really fits for me. What they're
Yeah, like I've seen him. I saw the first ever show that they actually did is the Hollywood Vampires, and I was like, oh, he's a nice guitar player, but Joe Perry's right there, So
exactly.
it's like, and honestly, other musicians say he's good. I've seen him a few times. I've seen him because I live in LA, so I've seen him get up with bands a
Oh,
few
okay.
times, and I'm like, yeah, he is good, but yeah, I don't know if I went to see Jeff Beck if I would be expecting quite so much Johnny Depp. So
Yeah, well, yeah, but
yeah.
it was still anytime I can see Jeff Beck, and the first time I saw him was in 1972 with Carmine Appice and Timmy Bogart, but he also had the Rough and Ready guys, Bob Tench and Max Middleton, so they were doing a lot of material from that era, which was fantastic. And then cut 2 years later, I actually did an album with Carmine. I was a kid then seeing that, but
Yeah.
I did a record with him and Pat Travers.
Jeff Beck is it's one of those guys where it's like, a casual rock fan certainly knows the name, but he doesn't really have that level, because he wasn't Jimmy Page in a huge band. He's not Joe
No,
Perry in another
I
huge
mean,
band.
but
So
the
it's like you
artwork.
have to really seek him out.
Yeah, you have to be a fan. There's a niche, and he's gone through a lot of different styles. I mean, he started off as rock and roll, which I totally love. The Beck Gola and the Truth album were big influences on me. Even though it's Ron Wood playing bass, his bass playing was crazy and loud and aggressive, and that's kind of the first thing I started listening to was that era. But speaking of Jeff Beck, in making Sheltering Sky, I tapped into different players. There's 41 guests on it, but I would tap into two different guitar players. I asked them. I said, "Hey, I'd really like to hear a Jeff Beck style kind of melody and solo over this part of the song," and they just totally nailed it. That being Toshi Yanagi from you see him all the time on the Jimmy Kimmel Show, and Jude Gold, who's with Jefferson Starship. Both of those guys are brilliant guitar players, and I'm really blessed that I have so many talented friends that just jumped in because they dug what they heard.
Yeah, no, that's got to be great. Obviously, we'll talk about the song that's the single and the video. But there's a song on there that jumped out at me when I was listening to the album, a song called "Giving Up the Ghost," and I wanted to talk a little bit about that song. Is it the same female vocalist that is on another track, or
Yeah,
maybe two on the album? So
actually, yes.
who is she? Because in the old days, a publicist would have sent me a CD. I would have opened the book and been like, who's on all these tracks? But it was just a link. So I was just
Well, they're
listening to
all
it the last couple of days. Yeah.
actually you can find out who everybody is on chuckwright.com. I have where it talks
Okay.
about the album. There's a list of all the different players. Like I said, there's 41. The singer, who actually she's on 3 songs, her name is Whitney Ty. And through doing this event I started in 2015 called Ultimate Jam Night, I coordinate between 45 and 100 professional musicians. I found her. I mean, she had a solo record out that was great, and we became really good friends. I asked her to do. I contacted her about doing the Bjork cover I was doing of "Army of Me," and we hit it off, and we're really close friends. And she actually co-wrote a song called "Time Waits for No One," And I actually do just released a video not too long ago of Giving Up the Ghost. That's out there on YouTube as well.
And
Um,
you have your own YouTube channel, or is it the record company? People
yeah,
just
no, the record company Cleopatra has
yeah.
the videos, and I have, Chuck Wright has, and myself, obviously. There's a channel that has the videos, and if you go to chuckwright.com, there's links to everything.
Yeah, you referenced an event that as you said, you started doing back in 2015. It's this
Yeah,
Ultimate Jam Night at the Whiskey A Go Go here in LA, and there's a sort of a tie-in for one of the events that you did, because the song that we'll talk about in a moment, Throwing Stones, it is sort of a call for the end of armed conflict. And if you listen to the show, that'll certainly come through. But talk about the very special, although that sounds a little sitcom-y to use the term very special, but you know what I mean. It was like a special event where you actually had Ukrainian musicians and some guests that had actually just left the Ukraine. So
yeah.
talk a little bit about that specific event of the
Well,
Ultimate
we
Jam Night.
decided one of the things that we do at Ultimate Jam Night is we do charity events, like for the homeless here, and we did one for the Pulse nightclub incident, the mass shooting there, and the one
In
in
Florida,
Vegas.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, and the one in Vegas too.
Oh, right.
Tried to raise money for that, and with the Ukraine situation, we connected with the World Central Kitchen to try to feed the immigrants that had to leave there. People being refugees is the right word, I should say, being that being forced out of their own country. And there was a family that had their home bombed out in Busha, and they were relocated to Los Angeles, and we invited them down. And the father spoke to the crowd and their little 7-year-old daughter sang "We Are the World," which was, a tearjerker.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
You know, we try to do what we can.
Sure,
It's
yeah.
a free show, so we tried to make it so people could. We auctioned off some things, and Gibson gave us a nice guitar to auction off, and different people came on board to try to help with that. So it kind of ties into the song "Throwing Stones," and that is an anti-war message song, but the lyric was written by Joe Retta, who you might know from Dio Disciples and Sweet and Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and that was written just before the invasion happened. It's like he's Nostradamus or something. And the message being, as human beings, when we started standing up and walking around on this earth, started throwing stones at each other to get our way, and now we're still at it. We're still launching missiles and throwing grenades, and the question posed in the song is, how long will it take before we learn that this is not the answer.
Yeah.
And there's footage, because of the war. When I created the video for it, I wanted to do something that reflected what was going on there as well.
Yeah, I mean, the video has a cool stylized look. There's a lot of
Yeah,
like TV screens and stuff, so it actually lends itself to, having some of the
yeah.
footage. The song itself, Throwing Stones, that we're talking about, which is on the album Sheltering Sky, talking to Chuck Wright at the moment. And the song Throwing Stones, I saw that you collaborated on that song with someone named Lanny Cordola from House of Lords, who I know because of the work, just having heard interviews with him about the work that he's done with children in Afghanistan, actually like living in Afghanistan and trying
He
to help them
has,
get
yeah.
out yeah. So talk about, obviously this is somebody who has, seen things that most of us never will, and had
No.
opportunities to help people in a way that, a lot of us would jump at the opportunity that he's had, sort of help out these girls. Talk about how long you've known Lanny and how that song kind of came about working on it with him.
Well, Lanny and I consider him like a family, brother. We started working together back with House of Lords, and he was in the Jafria band. I'd left Jafria, and when they did the second record, he joined Jafria. And then when Greg Jafria called me about doing House of Lords, I said, yeah, I'm in, and we kind of put a killer band together. And then because Gene Simmons said, if you could put a killer band together, I'll sign it to his new custom label. So we did that. But I've known him since then, and we've collaborated on many things, and 7 film scores, and we've done countless records together in the 90s. We did 2 reggae records. We did an ambient trance record. We have a very cool album out called Chaos is the Poetry, that has Greg Bissonette, you might know, on drums, and a few other people. And we did a project called Magdalene with Ken Mary from House of Lords. It's eclectic and very cool music. And we've been connected until really tightly connected until he left, and suddenly, surprisingly to me, ended up in Afghanistan, and then started this school for young girls to teach them guitar. It's called the Miraculous Love Kids. And that's miraculouslovekids.org. And he put together some really great videos with Sammy Hagar and Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and other notary people, people of note, I should say. He is on my album on 3 songs because years ago, some years back, I used to get together with him and Pat Torpey. We had 2 albums out called Odd Man Out. The 3 of us with a bunch of different guests on it, with Pat was the lead singer. But we used to get together all the time and go to Pat's house and record. And I was looking for some files, and I forgot all about these files. And there were 3 songs that were just bass, drums, and rhythm guitars, and one of them, and The Army of Me, had some soloing on it. And I go, this is too good to just forget about. So I finished those songs, and that's how Throwing Stones came about, and a song called It Never Fails. And then The Army of Me cover happened because Pat Torpey goes, man, I really love the way they used John Bonham's Levee Breaks drum part. And we just started jamming on it and recorded it. I'm not even playing the bass part exactly how Bjork has it, but it works really well. And so I finished it. That's how that. Lanny, we're in touch. I mean, we message once in a while, and he finally, he had to go to Pakistan once the Taliban took over Afghanistan, and he finally, it took him 6 months or more to get all of the girls out of there, and he's currently trying to locate.
Yeah, the last time that I heard anything, I'd heard a couple updates on Eddie Trunk does that show, his Trunk Nation show on Sirius XM, and Lanny checked in a couple times, and it was one of those, he got out, he went into Pakistan, but then he was like, he wouldn't leave until he got all the girls out.
No,
and
he's still there.
He's still there. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, he's still there. I mean, he's a brave soul. I go, he turned into Gandhi. He went from this crazy rock guy to Gandhi. Although he's very, he's one of the most well-read people that I've ever known in my life. I mean, if you walk into his apartment, it was like different stacks of books and different stacks of CDs, and they were all categorized to what the kind of books they were, the kind of music it was. And I mean, he's just a consumer and just brilliant lyricist, and a producer and guitar player all the way around.
I wanted to circle back on something you mentioned. You mentioned that you had done a number of film scores, and when I was reading through your bio, one jumped out at me because it's a movie it's a bit of a cult classic, Call the Conqueror, which is I think it said that you collaborated with what would have been, I guess, a fairly young Matt Sorum at that point. Less about that in particular, but that was the one that jumped out. Is it really just a bunch of musicians, the movie's on the big screen, and then you keep watching it and trying to figure out how it goes? How does that work to score a movie?
That film's different from the other films that we did, because the other films we did, we actually wrote and created music together for what was going on with the final cut which hopefully was the final cut of the movie. In that case, with Call the Conqueror, Matt and I were hired to be the rhythm section because Joe Goldsmith, who's the film composer on that, wanted to kind of do what Metallica did with the orchestra, and a heavy rock band. So we went in there and they had music, and we figured it out, and they would show it on the big screen. We were at Capitol Records, and we were watching big screen, and then this line would happen, and that means layout, and then we'd go back in. It was an interesting process, definitely. And it was very fun to do.
Yeah, no, I would imagine. And it's interesting because, this would have been in the early 80s that you've done it. And it felt like in the early 2000s, there was that trend of, bands with orchestras. I remember Aerosmith did a Dream On for an MTV special, but then, there's whole albums. Kiss did an album with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. And the Metallica one is one of the better knowns. And I think sometimes it works really well. And I think there's other times where you're like, oh yeah, the orchestra just doesn't seem to fit. There's sometimes it's great,
Well,
but a movie score would make sense. That seems like a place where,
it
you
actually
could use it.
it's hard to explain what a great feeling it is. I actually did a short tour in 2008 with a full orchestra doing in 90 minutes of the show, or at least an hour. I can't remember exactly, but in that era, it was just all Pink Floyd.
Oh
And it
wow.
was called the Flashback Tour. And I can't tell you what it's like to be have an orchestra behind you because the band's like right in front, and then you're surrounded. It's just an amazing experience and sound. And that Pink Floyd music, of course, lends itself to orchestrated.
Yeah.
Comes
Yeah,
from
it's funny that producing style that's accredited to Phil Spector for inventing the wall of sound, but it sounds like you were literally standing in front of a wall of sound with like an orchestra,
it really does. It feels great. It feels really great.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it always it seems like probably in a lot of cases, doing a film score, you touched on something. If they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna shoot a new like 20 minutes for the movie, and then it's like, oh okay, well we're gonna need new score, and you're like,
Well,
it
of
could
course,
be one of those jobs that you think you're done with, and then it's like, nope, more music, I guess.
well, you never want to score music to something that's not the final edit, because
Sure.
I mean, you're doing like foreshadowing for a certain scene, or you're doing hits for a certain reason because of something happening. You want to tie it, like somebody, you hear the spooky music or whatever, and then the door slams, you want to have a big hit. And if that's all edited differently, nothing makes sense. So,
Yeah, it's funny when you think about, people whose careers are film scores, like John Williams, he has those like recognizable pieces from Star Wars and Jaws and Indiana Jones. And then it's like, oh, also the NBC nightly news theme, So it's just like,
well, this thing's a 007 always has that
yeah,
one thing throughout that's a thread through all of those movies. It's a foreshadowing sound. When you hear that melody, you know what it is.
yeah. No, yeah, and it's great. It's interesting, Sometimes you get movies that the music doesn't really match, because it's too timely. Like there's that Tom Cruise movie, Legend, and then the first. It's a movie that's sort of like it's from the Silence of the Lambs universe. It was called Manhunter. Michael Mann did this movie, and like the
Okay.
movie's actually really well done, but the music is like it's a
It
little
dates
too
it.
like mid '80s, and
Yeah,
you're like, ooh,
music, and especially the '80s kind of sounds, the synth sounds and different things, and synth drums and different things they'd use, really can date a record. That's why a
yeah,
record like an old, original AC/DC records still stand up, because it's just raw and
yeah.
the real thing.
No,
It's
and I mean
sound thing.
yeah. I mean, look, I know you mentioned collaborating with Gene Simmons. Bands like Kiss have albums that are so synth heavy. I don't even think like an album like their album Crazy Crazy Nights or just Crazy Nights. It's not a bad album, but it's like, oh, it just sounds like that time period.
Well, yeah, and
And
they did a disco period too, didn't they?
oh yeah,
It's
yes,
like,
they sure
come
did.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Like,
know exactly.
what's the trend now? Let's jump. We have to jump on it, or our
Well,
careers are
yeah,
over.
I know, and then
You know,
like one of their best albums, "Creatures of the Night." By that point, people were like, "Nah, you know what? We're not ready for that." So that
right?
it took years for people to find it. But anyway, um, it's interesting, just sort of like the trends in music. And I was reading there's an incredibly long list of people that you collaborated with, but for me, one that jumped right out that I want to ask you about, while we've still got a little time left. I wanted to know what was the circumstances that you worked with Alice Cooper, and how was that for you?
Well, that came about at the time. This was 2000, late 2001, I think. I was in Montrose with Ronnie Montrose, and
Okay.
the drummer was Eric Singer, who you know from Kiss. And
Yes. Yeah. And he actually was the drummer. The first concert I ever went to, which was Alice Cooper on his Trash tour. Eric Singer
okay,
was his drummer, and then he
wow.
went on to
All right.
Kiss.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. He said, "Hey, listen, Alice Cooper's going to go out. Do you want to check it out and see if you want to, come down and play and check it out?" And I said, yeah. I mean, I've been playing with Ronnie, but Ronnie was sporadically working. It wasn't like a full tour, and this was a 75 city, 17 country tour, mostly in Europe, which I really wanted to go to
Sure.
and go back to. It's been a while, and so I went there, and that's how that happened. And I did the 2000. I did the
Was
Descent
that
into
was his was that
Despair.
his Brutal Planet tour?
I
That
was
was
right after
that
that.
was the new
Descent
album.
into
Okay, so it was
Dragon.
after that album.
Yeah,
Okay.
we were
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
some Brutal Planet music. Like the first half of the show was like pretty dark and heavy,
Yeah.
and then we got into the older, the 70s
Yeah.
Alice Cooper
It,
music.
it's funny you're talking about, about 20 years ago, Alice doing, 75 dates. He's 20 years older and he still does about that, if not more.
Well, you know what he told
I
me?
saw him twice this year, so
He told me. I mean, I used to go out with him all the time. We'd go shopping and things in the different cities. I'd meet him and we'd go. But I asked him, like, when do you think you'll retire? And he goes, 10 years after Mick Jagger. so he's going to be
Funny.
around a while.
Just the other day, I heard Sammy Hagar say something very similar. He's like, because I think Mick is like a couple years older than him. He's like, look, if Mick is still doing it, obviously I can still do it. But
Well,
Sammy sings in a way where you're like, if Sammy is like, yeah, you know what, I can't do it anymore, everybody be like, okay, we'll miss you, but we get it. But you hear him and you're like, no, he's still got it. I mean,
yeah,
Alice is really perfect in that, like when he was in his early 20s, he sang in a way that he can still,
and
pretty close to approximate,
he kind of always looked old. I mean, anyway,
true,
he's got that macabre kind of
yeah.
spooky look already. So getting older doesn't really affect him as much. And he's a great performer, connecting with the audience. And it was an honor to be part of such a Broadway stylized show with that kind of production. I just love that.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. And I mean, it's always been fun to watch. It's funny, that was the first concert I ever went to, and then the second concert I ever saw was Kiss, and I saw Aerosmith. This is all in 1990, and so it was like at a certain point, I was only going to be disappointed by the bands that I see. I'm like, oh, they're just standing there. What happened?
Yeah, and some, I'm not going to name names, but there's a handful of singers that are out there still touring and doing things that should not be doing it at all anymore.
Yeah, no, yeah.
They can't even get close to what it's like. It depresses you. It's like here's a band I will say. I saw Yes when I was 15 for $5 at the Whiskey, and that kind of got me into prog. But
Sure.
I saw them before Chris Squire passed away, and I wish I never saw this. John Anderson was in there. I go, I just wish I never saw this because it kind of ruined that whole my remembrance of the band.
Yeah.
It's and Alan White was not well, and they just you got to say, you know what, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So there's a time and a place to just call it a day, I think.
Yeah, I think it's always disappointing, but it's what's always more impressive. Like earlier this year, I saw Paul McCartney. I think he's 80 now.
I did too.
I saw, yeah, and I saw the Stones last year in Vegas. Somehow my dad had never seen them. I was like, I'm taking you to see the Stones, and it's like, yeah, they obviously don't move the way, and if you're going to watch videos from the 70s, but it's like Mick Jagger in those 2 hours moves more than I do in a week.
Yeah, I know.
So
He's if you've seen he has a video of his workout routine that he does every day, and you can see that, and it's pretty amazing.
yeah.
Involves some yoga, but
Yeah, yeah, right, exactly. So, obviously, throughout your career, you've been involved with so many musicians. We've just touched on a couple of them. I wanted to talk about how early in your career, you played bass on 2 tracks, and you did some background vocals on the Quiet Riot Metal Health. The record's called Metal Health, but also the song Bang Your Head. Wait, I actually was going to put the parentheses in the wrong place. It's Metal Health, parentheses, Bang Your Head. I was going to put Metal Health in parentheses. My English teacher from high school probably would have, been very upset if I used the parentheses wrong. But, and, you obviously spent more time with them later, but talk about just being a part of that album that was so big. I mean, a metal album had never been #1 on the Hot 100,
No, it hadn't, and it changed the whole fabric of the music scene at that time. Come Up Feel the Noise came out, and suddenly new wave bands were like, "You're out of here." The Knack, goodbye, motels,
Yeah.
and the record label started signing Sunset Strip rock bands with a lot of hair, and I feel that song "Come Up Feel the Noise" is the reason that happened. But I was working with the band Dubrow, which was Kevin Dubrow, the singer, after Randy Rhoads and Rudy both left to play with Ozzy, he had a band called Dubrow, and I joined that band, and we did all the demos, which a lot of that became the Mental Health record. And we did the clubs and everything, and played for labels, and then finally the label that signed the band saw us, and we worked something out. And and then, as you know, Randy passed away in the plane crash, and Rudy rejoined. And at that time, I had my own band that was kicking ass here in LA. It was a prog kind of band with laser show. We're the first band ever to have a laser show, by the way. But
Wow.
so it's kind of a double-edged sword with that whole thing, because I'm involved in. I sing on every track, but I play bass on one of the most legendary metal songs I think out there, but I wasn't a part of that initial success rush and touring and all of that. But I did later got involved in the second album, Condition Critical. I sang on every song, and I played bass on another song called Born to Rock. And then I was with Jafria, who some people might or might not know, but we had a hit single. We toured with Deep Purple and Foreigner. I was with that band, and Rudy quit Quiet Riot, and Kevin asked me if I'd be interested in joining the band again. And at that time, even though Jafria was having a lot of success, we were told, both Craig Goldie, who you might know from Dio, we were both told that the singer Dave Isley and him are going to be the songwriters, and that nobody else can be involved in the songwriting. And I'm a songwriter, and I said, well, that's not cool. So when I got the call from Kevin to join Quiet Riot, I jumped right on it. I said, yeah, I'm in. So, and then I ended up co-writing all the songs on the QR3 album with them, and the subsequent tour. I'm in and out of Quiet Riot 26 years of my life, and 9 albums, I think it is, something like that.
Yeah.
And
Rudy just went back at the end of last year,
So, and that's the 5th time.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So it's like a baseball team, I guess. Okay, you're on the bench, you're coming back, you're in. Whatever.
It's like just tell me what uniform I have to put on next week.
That's right. It came at a good time, because my solo record was just happening, and I could concentrate on that and promote that and get that out there.
Well, as we wind down, I do want to circle back to Sheltering Sky. As I mentioned, the publicist who set this up, Jody, she did mention that it's on the ballot for the Grammy Awards. So that's always, that's
to my surprise, it's under consideration. I hope I get.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Which
it's like not at the stage where it's a nominee, but it could potentially be. It's like a nominee to be a nominee.
It's when they'll send out a ballot of, like, here are your choices for rock albums of the year, and I'm on that, which was surprise to me. As was winning. I actually won Best Instrumental and Best Video at the Rock Music Alliance Awards for the opening track on the album called Weight of Silence, which was the very first song I wrote. I wrote this music during the pandemic, and that's because I had the time to do it. Between playing with Quiet Riot on the weekends and organizing Ultimate Jam Night, I just didn't have time to sit down and write. So I was not intending on doing a solo record. I just started writing music for art's sake, for the sake of music, for what I want to hear. That's why when you listen to the album, you're going to hear hard rock, of course, and industrial rock and funk and jazz fusion, prog. I have a folk gospel piece that's like Robert Plant and Alison Krauss. And I also have a full-on Celtic piece on there that's sung by David Victor, who was in the band Boston. Like I said, there's 41 friends of mine, guests on the album, that are all mostly from bands you would know.
Right. And the song I referenced earlier, Giving Up the Ghost, it's more of a mellower song. I don't want to call it a ballad, because that kind of has a different connotation. But it's a slower song. It's a very melodic song. I love her voice, the singer that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, Whitney Ty. Yeah, she's awesome.
Whitney Ty. Yeah. And chuckwright.com seems to be the place for everything. Is this something that you're hoping to get an opportunity to tour with your solo stuff? Or
you know what? To do that, I think to be able to pull off the music that's on this album and to do it in an immersive type experience, which the music lends itself to, I would need Roger Waters' budget. Seriously,
it's a great point. And you know what? There's only a few guys who have Roger Waters' budget. And
I know
Waters is one of them.
And whoever, but yeah, it would take a lot of financing to really pull it off properly. And I haven't really thought about trying to do a streamlined version of it because I think it would lose the integrity of what the music is. So I am busy doing other things. I'm in a band called Legends of Classic Rock, and we were in Europe all summer, and it's all guys from classic rock bands that you would know. And I have an album coming out with the drummer from House of Lords and the newer guitar player from House of Lords coming out on Frontiers called Demons Down, and that's sometime next year that'll be out. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's interesting as, people who grew up, me myself talking about just listening to this kind of music and continuing to listen to it. Without Frontier Records, there would be so little new music. Now I know that this album is on Cleopatra Records, but so many musicians I talk to is like, even if I'm not talking about something that's on Frontiers, it's like, oh, I have something coming out on Frontiers next year. And it's great that they put out so much
yeah, they
stuff,
still
Yeah.
they that label kind of has a niche that they like to stick to. Like they wouldn't understand my album, like this album at all. Where somebody like Cleopatra, who has a pretty eclectic catalog of material, totally get what I want to do, and that's why it worked out with them.
Yeah.
Whereas Frontiers it's a corporate rock, melodic rock label, and that's what they kind of stick to. And they have a niche, and that's why they have all those bands, and they're the only one really doing it, right?
Yeah.
So more part to them. Thank God they're keeping it going.
Yeah, and I mean, I think within the last several years, I think that like Whitesnake put out an album. So it's like, it's not just these sort of, super group bands that are combinations of people, like big bands from,
Well,
I don't know.
Journey's on there now.
Yeah, Journey. Right. That's a perfect
That's a
example.
good
Yeah.
example, and Night
Yeah.
Ranger, and
Yeah.
because there's no other really record labels that'll touch, those bands, 70s, 80s, corporate rock, or whatever you want to call them, melodic rock type bands.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the frustrating thing because you
Yeah.
just mentioned Night Ranger, Journey. I mentioned Whitesnake. Those the albums that I'm thinking of from all those bands, they're all great. I talked to guys from
Yeah.
Night Ranger, but unless you know that they have a new album and you seek it out, it's like you'll hear Night Ranger songs on the radio, just not new ones, and
No, they never
that's
play any new. The
yeah.
thing, this is totally what I feel about all of that, and what really changed the whole market is radio stations became more corporate, and they took the DJ out of the equation. Where DJs used to be able to pick music that they thought, oh, no, this is great. You guys got to check this out. Now they have a playlist that they have to play.
Yeah.
They used to have a lot more leeway with finding material, and there are examples I personally know of that if a DJ broke the record in their territory and it got, like, they call it phones, where people are calling in, hey, that song is great, play it again, and then that spread to the other markets around them, and then that spread, and that's how a lot of songs used to break back in the day.
Yeah, no, I know, and it's a lot of radio stations are owned by like a handful, like 3 corporations seem to own
Yeah,
most
yeah,
radio stations, and it's like one guy at the company or one person at the company programs, like 20 stations. So it's not
right.
even tailor-made to, like radio in Chicago used to be different than radio in New York and radio in LA, and now it's like, oh, this sounds like the same station that you
It's all
listen to.
homogenized, man.
Yeah.
It's yeah, and also music and intellectual property in general has been devalued a lot too, And trying now being an independent artist is pretty daunting, and it's not something I was wanting to do or looking forward, to doing. But because there's 60,000 songs a day put out on Spotify, and it's
Yeah.
hard to get attention above all these people. I mean, maybe if I put a pig on a bowling ball running around, I would get more views on my video.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, I enjoyed listening to the new album and looking forward
Well,
to
thank you so much.
what you've got coming up next year. ChuckWright.com for everything. Chuck, great chatting with you. Hopefully we have a chance to chat next year when your new project comes out.
That'd be great.
Thanks for taking the time.
Okay, nice meeting you, Christian.
Yeah,
Cheers.
very nice to meet you. Thanks again.